The time has finally come. I'm most of the way through a 32-ounce nitro cold brew. Today we're going to talk about ATC, Focal, Barefoot, Atom, Amphion, and more. We're going to compare every single category between all of these monitors, and by the end of this video, I'm going to pick a monitor that's going to stay in my room. Let's go! So behind me you see the Focal Trio 11BE, the Atom S3H, and the Amphion 218. I've had these three monitors in my room for quite some time now. As far as ATC is concerned, I have spent many hours working on nearly every model of ATC available, so I'm extremely familiar with them as a monitor, what they sound like. I've worked on them a ton. I've actually been friends with the North American ATC rep for like 15 years, and pre-COVID, we were working on a collaboration video between myself and ATC for this YouTube channel. So even though they are not here right now, I feel very confident in including them in this comparison because I have so much time on them. And for the sake of this video and this shootout, we're going to be talking about the ATC SCM25 anytime that ATC is brought up because it's in the same price category and kind of goes head to head with these monitors. Let's talk about Barefoot for a second. So I've spent quite a bit of time on the Micromain 27s. I've worked on these in a handful of rooms actually, and again, same as ATC. Even though they're not in this room right next to these, I've worked on them so much in so many different rooms that I feel confident including them in this shootout and really discussing the differences between all of these monitors. Now, obviously, I couldn't possibly include all of the monitors in this comparison because there are a ton of monitors at this price point that are competitors with these. So these are my picks for what I was interested in trying and the options that I've been looking at to go in my room here. So I have dedicated videos on these three monitors already out on this channel, so if you want to see dedicated reviews of these monitors, go check them out. Throughout those videos, there have been two other companies that have been brought up relentlessly, and one of them is Genelec. Genelec wasn't on the list for me to try out because I've not ever found myself gravitating towards them in the past. However, I'm not against trying them out, so if they end up happening to send me a pair, I'd happily try them out. The other one is Head, the Type 20s and the Type 30s. Tons of people have been bringing them up, especially against the Atom S3Hs, because they are real direct competitors to these monitors right here. And I don't want to trash talk anybody, any companies. I don't want to talk down or bad about anybody. But as the Type 20s and the Type 30s were getting released and introduced and they were starting to ship, I messaged Head many times on social media and through email. We chatted back and forth quite a bit. I was trying relentlessly to get them to send a pair anywhere in Nashville. It didn't even have to be to me, to any retailer, to any store, to any studio, to any individual. I even offered to host a listening party here in my room if they would just send me a pair so I could hear them and try them out. I'd be happy to host a listening party. They weren't interested in any of that. And so that is kind of where the conversation with Head ends. And I think that covers all the bases of the monitors that I'm interested in this price category. If you see me looking at my phone, it's because there is far too much information for me to possibly remember all this, so I have to look at my notes to get through all this. I've been taking notes for weeks and weeks throughout all this shootout, and I'm gonna have to read some of this from my phone. Before we get into it, there are going to be links in the description below for every pair of these monitors, in addition to links for a whole bunch of other stuff, and if you use any of those links, I get a tiny bit of commission, and it really helps the channel out. Sweetwater has been a massive part in helping this channel grow, and I very much appreciate if you guys use those links for anything you might need. The categories we are going to be discussing and comparing these monitors on is overall tonal balance, transient response, like how fast they are, how accurate they are in the time domain, top-end transparency, low frequency response, low-end control, or the tightness of the low end, the depth front to back, how deep or shallow do the monitors sound, the stereo field accuracy, how pinpointable things are within the stereo spectrum, the size of the sweet spot, clinical versus flattering, if they're very analytical and very brutally honest, or if they're very pleasurable to listen to. We are going to discuss the looks between all of them, even though it doesn't really matter, and of course the price, and then of course at the end I'm going to choose one that I'm going to move forward with. So let's start with overall tonal balance between all of these monitors. The Focal Trio 11BEs feels the most balanced to me. It's just got all of the low end, all of the mid-range, all of the top end. It's definitely from like 30 hertz all the way up to as high as we can hear. It's the most even and the most balanced. In second place is the ATC SCM25. The only reason that's in second place is because there's not as much sub bass. They roll off a little early, but the rest of the frequency range from like 40 or 50 hertz and up is fantastic. In third place, we have Barefoot. They are pretty balanced overall, little bit more mid-forward, but pretty balanced. In fourth place, we have the Atom S3H. They feel a bit mid-forward and just a tiny bit light in the very low end of the sub bass, and the top end is fantastic on them. In fifth and unfortunately last place, we have the Amphion 218s. They are definitely the darkest of the whole bunch. I wouldn't go as far as to say they sound muffled, but they're definitely dark sounding, and they're very thick in the like 100 to 500 hertz range. In the next category, transient response, I'm really going to be talking about like 100 or 150 hertz and up, because tightness and low end control is kind of the same thing, just from like 100 or 150 hertz and down. And I didn't feel confident lumping all of this into the same category because it's kind of two different things. So how fast they are, how accurate they are in the time domain. We have got in first place the Focal Trio 11BEs, but tied for first place, we have the ATC SCM25s. Both of these are stunning in that department. In second place, but very close behind, we have the Atom S3Hs, and tied for second place, we have the Amphion 218s, and in third place, even though there's 5 monitors, we have Barefoot last. Now, it was really hard to decide to put Barefoot last, actually, but I think it's important for me to take a moment here and say that at this level, at this price point, with this quality of monitors, like none of them suck. There's no sucky options on the market. Even when I'm giving someone negative remarks, or even if they happen to be in last place, oftentimes we're like splitting hairs here. Like I have to choose an order for the sake of a video like this. A monitor might be just barely behind another one in a category, but I still have to put them in the order that I prefer them. Okay, the next category is top-end transparency. In first place, we have the Atom Audio S3Hs. These are unbelievably transparent in the top end. It's hard to put into words. It's like it's just there. It's like the tweeter or the ribbon driver just disappears and you're not listening to a speaker. You're just listening to the top end. The top end on the Atoms is fantastic. In second place, we have the Focal Trio 11BEs, and they are crazy good, like crazy good. So very, very close behind the Atoms. In third place, we have the ATC, and again, crazy good, barely. This was hard to even decide, honestly. These top 3 was hard to decide, but I have to put ATC third in terms of top end transparency. In fourth place, we have the Barefoots, and in fifth place, we have the Amphion, as they are the darkest sounding of all of them. They don't feel like a transparent monitor to me in a lot of ways, but we're going to talk more about that in a bit. Okay, the next category is a low-end frequency response, and basically this is how far down does the low end extend, and how strong do they feel at those lowest frequencies. So in first place, we have the Focal Trio 11BE. The low end on these is crazy. I mean crazy. The low end on them is so strong and so well balanced and so thick, and they just sound, it's crazy good. In second place, we have the Barefoot. And the main reason why the Barefoot got second place is because, in my experience, the Barefoots are fairly inconsistent from room to room. So they got second place because they're kind of inconsistent. And what you may hear them in one room and the low end is crazy good, and you hear them in another room and it's less crazy good. So Barefoot gets second place. Both the Barefoot and the Focal Trio 11BEs, you will absolutely not need a sub for anything that you're working on ever. And so that's why these are the top two. In third place is the ATC SCM25s, as they don't go down nearly as low as the Focals or the Barefoot. In fourth place is the Atom S3Hs. Now, the stated frequency response, I believe, of the S3Hs is 32 hertz. So on paper, they are supposed to hit really low. However, in use, and I played around with placement and like I dialed them in and played with settings, in like real world scenarios, they definitely don't feel like they go down to 32. They feel like they go down to 38, and maybe even 40 is very usable. So the Atoms get fourth place. And in fifth place is the Amphion 218s. They are thicker than you would think they would be for the smallness of the cabinet compared to the others in this category, but it just is definitely light in the low end. The stated frequency response of these is down to 38 hertz, and I think that might even be a bit generous. I think 38 to 40 maybe, but they're definitely the lightest of the bunch. The next category is low-end control or tightness. How tight and controlled are these monitors from like 100 hertz and down? So first pick for me in this category is the Focal Trio 11BEs. The low end is just, I cannot say enough good things about it. The low end is perfect on these. You definitely don't need a sub. There's more than enough low end and you can dial it in and out as to your tastes. It's so tight and so well controlled. The note definition down low is so incredible. It just feels so accurate. In second place, as far as the tightness of the low end, is actually the Atom S3Hs. Now, while there wasn't a whole ton of sub bass with these monitors, what was there did feel extremely tight and extremely well controlled. It was very well damped. It felt very accurate and very fast. In third place, we have the ATCs, which is very, very close to the Atom. You could almost make them interchangeable, but really, really good. In fourth place, we have the Barefoot, and again, almost interchangeable with ATC. Like second, third, and fourth place on these is almost interchangeable for the tightness of the low end. In fifth place, we've got the Amphion 218, and this is the only category that I'm actually going to fault these monitors for. From like 250 hertz down on the Amphions, they especially compared to the others in this category, they feel loose. I've played around with placement. I've played around with all kinds of stuff. There's no settings on them whatsoever, but they definitely feel loose and lack some control compared to the other monitors. Now again, it still sounds great, but when you're sitting them next to these other monitors and directly comparing them to ATC and Barefoot, they're definitely on the loose side. The next category is the depth of the monitor. How three-dimensional are they? And this is not a category that I can say is good or bad. This is just a characteristic of the monitors. NS10s are one of the most famous and most widely used monitors in all of history, and possibly more hits have been mixed on NS10s than any other monitor in history, and they have a very flat, very close, very two-dimensional sound to them. This is not necessarily saying deep is good and flat is not good. This is just the differences between them and where they rank on that spectrum. The number one speaker with the absolute most depth to it is the Focal Trio 11BEs. They are shockingly deep, like reach all the way in the back and grab the back end of a reverb tail, or when you're listening to a drum room, you can hear like the back wall on the drum room sound. Like they're crazy deep. In second place, we have ATC, and I think that they're very close. The ATCs are very close to the Focals in this department. From all the times that I've worked on them, they are just a tiny bit flatter and just a tiny bit less deep than the Focal, still incredibly deep. In third place, we have the Amphion 218s. The Amphions are kind of like the halfway point here. If you've got NS10 closeness and flatness, and you've got the Focals that is the most deep, the Amphions are about the halfway point. In fourth place, we've got Barefoot, and they're almost interchangeable with the Amphion. They feel very much like the halfway point between super flat and super deep. And last, we have the Atom S3Hs. Now again, this is not good and bad, but the Atoms are definitely the flattest and most two-dimensional, the most similar to an NS10 in terms of their depth of all the monitors here. The next category is going to be stereo field accuracy. So when you're panning something or when something is going from one side to the other, how pinpointable is it? How specific is the stereo field? So in first place, we have the Atom S3Hs. They are shockingly good in the stereo spectrum. The ability to pan something to like 2 o'clock or 2:15 or 2:20 and like it's right there. It's crazy good on the Atoms. Unfortunately, this incredible accuracy in the stereo spectrum comes at the cost of a smaller sweet spot. We're going to talk more about that in a minute. In second place, we have ATC. In third place, we have Focal. Focal and ATC are almost interchangeable in this category in terms of the stereo field. So all top three are unbelievably good. In fourth place, we have the Barefoot. In fourth place, again, tied with the Barefoot, we have Amphion. But in this category, none of them are really bad at all. Like, the Atoms are definitely the best. Focal and ATC are almost interchangeable as the next best, but they all are really good. The next category is the size of the sweet spot. This is again one of these categories that is not necessarily good or bad, just is, and something that if I was buying a monitor without being able to try them, I would like to know this. But I will say for my personal preferences, I prefer the larger sweet spot. So in first place, the Focal Trio 11BEs are shockingly good. They have the craziest big sweet spot of any monitor I've ever worked on, and I've worked on a lot of monitors. But like when I first put them up, if you go back and watch my Focal video, that was one of the first things I said about them is immediately, I was like, these sound exactly the same, like exactly the same. In every position around the room, I could take my mouse and keyboard and go mix over in the corner and be just fine mixing on these. Crazy good. In second place, we have kind of tied for second place, the Amphion, the Barefoot, and the ATC, all of which have a sweet spot that is just fine. It is plenty big enough for any use cases, and I have no problems with the sweet spot on them. In last place, we have the Atom Audio S3H. It is definitely picky. Like moving your head in and out 1 foot takes you in and out of the sweet spot. So again, not a good or bad thing. I think that's part of the reason why the Atoms have such a crazy good stereo spectrum, but that does come at the cost of like, you got to get your positioning right and you got to sit right there. Definitely no like sliding one end of a console to the other and still being in the sweet spot. Okay, the next category is clinical and brutally obvious versus flattering. Now, again, this is one of these categories that is not necessarily good or bad, and everyone is probably going to have a different preference based on what they like and what they prefer. Now, on the clinical, brutally honest side of things, this is the kind of monitor that's going to make you work really, really hard to get the mix right. It's probably going to be great when it's done, but you are going to have to work for it. And the downside to this clinical, brutally honest side of monitor is it's not incredibly inspiring to work on. Stuff doesn't really sound all that exciting on them, and like playing mixes for clients in the studio, like they're not going to be wowed by the sound of them. The polar opposite end of this spectrum is flattering. Everything sounds pleasing and good. They're fun to listen to. They're super inspiring, super engaging. Now, for speakers in general, this spectrum is incredibly wide. But for studio monitors, this flattering side of things gets moved kind of to the center because the most flattering speakers are home theater speakers, stereo speakers, hi-fi speakers. For the sake of this video, we're talking about studio monitors, so we're only talking from like clinical to like the halfway point to flattering. I'm hoping this is making sense. This is so hard to put all this stuff into words. On the clinic, and again, not good or bad, just this is the spectrum. On the clinical, brutally honest side is the Amphion 218s. They're incredibly brutally honest. They're incredibly clinical. They're not the speaker that you're gonna wow a client with your mixes on. If you can get the mix working on the Amphions, it's probably gonna work everywhere in a very similar way as in S10s. Now the next monitor on the way from clinical to flattering is going to be the Atoms. The Atoms are incredibly honest. The reason why I put them one notch over is just because they are a little bit more fun to listen to music on than the Amphion. They are a little bit more inspiring, a little bit more fun. The next in this category is going to be Barefoot. Barefoots are pretty fun to listen to. They're usually pretty thick. They have a lot of oomph to them. And so between all of these monitors, I would put Barefoot at like the halfway point. Next, and more on the flattering side, would be ATC. Now this is kind of hard to quantify because ATC is still very clinical sounding. They're just like so impressive, even while being clinical, that they're fun to listen to. So I would put ATC on the flattering side of the rest of so far, just because they're really fun to listen to, but they're incredibly clinical and incredibly accurate. And in the most flattering spot is going to be the Focal Trio 11BEs. And like I said before, I still think the Focals are like halfway between clinical and flattering, but they are the most flattering of this bunch. They're incredibly fun to listen to. They're incredibly inspiring. Clients are wowed by them. They're shockingly good to listen to, but also plenty clinical enough for me to hear incredibly small EQ moves. I've started compressing stuff less working on them. So they're almost like, they're very clinical and very honest, but also really fun to listen to. The next category is looks, and this is kind of silly and totally subjective, but I think, you know, you want to be wowed by the looks of something when you spent this kind of money and you sit in front of it every day. For me, I think Barefoot probably wins this. They have done such a good job with their marketing, the aluminum faceplate. Like, Barefoot speakers are iconic looking, and you can point them out in any room that they're in. It's the first thing you notice, that's a Barefoot. Now, I don't necessarily think they're the best looking, but they are certainly the most iconic looking of this bunch. The next place is the Focal Trio 11BEs. They're just beautiful. Like, sitting here, the finishes, like the way the light glistens off them in the right angle, like the brushed tweeter cover, the side stain on them, like the material the cones are made out of. I think the Focals are truly beautiful. Next, in my opinion, is the Atom. They're just badass and like sinister, like something that would come out of Star Wars. So it's like Darth Vader's monitor. They look very like modern and clean and badass, and they're great looking monitor. And I think the Amphion 218 is like the most interesting, most unique looking monitor. If you see the Amphion, you know it's an Amphion because nothing else looks even close to it. And in last place is the ATCs. As great as they sound, as awesome as they are in most categories, they are pretty just run-of-the-mill, mediocre. They're very unassuming. ATCs are unassuming looking. None of this even matters. You don't buy speakers for what they look like, but I thought I'd include this one. Let's talk about price. The Atom S3Hs are $7,000 a pair. The Amphion are $7,800 per pair with an amp. They're the only passive speakers here, so you have to buy an amp, and if you buy their Amphion's Amp 700 that's recommended to go with these, it comes out to $7,800 a pair. The Focal Trio 11BEs are $8,000 a pair. ATC SCM25s come out to $9,000 per pair, and the Barefoot Micromain 27s come out to $11,000 per pair. Whew, okay, let's take a second and see if we can polish off this coffee. That was a lot of information in a really condensed amount of time, or at least the most condensed I can make it. This video is going to be like 30 minutes long. Okay, so what monitor am I going to choose? The first ones that I'm going to axe are actually the Barefoots. They are definitely the most iconic looking. They are one of the only two speakers that you don't need a subwoofer with. However, in my experience, they are incredibly inconsistent from one room to the next. I've worked on them in one room and absolutely loved them. It's the best thing ever. And I've worked on them in a different room and I absolutely hated it. So I'm gonna cut the Barefoot out just because of that. This is a massive investment. At this level, all of these are a massive investment. The Barefoot's lost for me personally in enough other categories. I'm gonna cut the Barefoots first. Now, to be fair, I have not worked on the Micromain 45s or the Micromain 45s with a sub, which are a little bit more in line with some of the price point of some of these others, but I've not worked on those, so I can only speak to the Micromain 27s here. The next ones to get cut. I'm sorry, ATC. ATC is just not gonna make it. Look, I love ATC monitors. I genuinely love them. They are so good from 100 hertz up, but in this price category, the SCM25s are the only ones to go with, and they're the only three-ways. Now, I'm personally not interested in a two-way ATC. The three-ways are where the magic of ATC happens. But unfortunately, Unfortunately, the SCM25s just don't have nearly enough low end for me. It means I would absolutely have to run a sub. And as soon as you add a subwoofer that keeps up with this quality of a monitor, you're talking multiple thousands of dollars more, which kind of bumps us up into a whole new category of monitors to compare them against. And if you don't want to run a sub, ATC, the SCM150s are the only monitors, the smallest, cheapest monitors they make that actually go down to 30 hertz. I've worked on the SCM150s a ton of times, maybe the most of all the ATC monitors. They're unbelievably good, but they're $20,000 a pair, and that is just way out of budget for me and way out of budget for most people. So I'm sorry, ATC, as much as I love you, we're not going ATC. And that is the reason why I didn't actually have those in my room, is because I have worked on both Barefoot and ATC so many times that they were a known quantity. I'm very comfortable with them. I know exactly what to expect, so much so that I was comfortable comparing them to these, even though they weren't sitting right next to them. Okay, so we're down to the three that are sitting behind me: the Focal Trio 11BE, the Atom S3H, and the Amphion 218. The next one I'm gonna have to cut is gonna be Amphion. The lack of low end is just not doable for me. They only go down to 38 hertz, and the low end that is there, and the low mids and the upper bass that is there, is pretty loose. Now, I think if you were super into the Amphion and you added the subwoofers, that would probably change all of this. It'd probably change all of my thoughts about the low end on these. However, adding even the smallest subwoofer to these bumps this whole package up to $13,000. Same with ATC. Once you're talking about $13,000, you're kind of in a whole new price category, and comparing them, you should be comparing this system against a whole nother set of series of monitors. Sorry, Amphion, it's not gonna be you. Atom Audio and Focal. Here's the deal, Atom. You have the best top end of the bunch. You have the best stereo field separation of the bunch. You're on par for transient response. You're the cheapest monitor of the whole bunch, actually. But there's two things that hold me back from the Atom, and one is the low end, and the other is the lack of depth. Let's talk about low end for a minute. Even though the stated frequency response of these is 32 hertz, I don't feel like they go that low, and I feel like I would definitely need a subwoofer with them, which same problem as the rest of these. Once you add a sub, it's extra cost. Now, I will say that adding a subwoofer to these still keeps you in this ballpark of price, because, I mean, the Barefoots are $11,000, so you could add a killer sub to these and still be less expensive than the Barefoots, but they sound very two-dimensional. They're very flat like an NS10. Now, that might be great for some of you. That might be exactly what you're after. For me, I'm so into the depth. I really like depth. I've got my pair of NS10s, and I've got my pair of Oratones if I need a flat two-dimensional sounding speaker. I'm sorry, Adam. You make a great speaker, but it's not for me. That obviously means the Focal is the one that is left. What can I say about these Focal Trio 11BEs except that they're stunning. They're perfect even. They check all the boxes for me, all the boxes. They have tons of depth. The low end is absolutely crazy. It's so controlled. It's so well managed. There's like zero desire for a subwoofer, no matter what kind of music I'm working on. The top end is absolutely incredible. The transient response is fantastic. The focus mode is one of the most underrated features of these. Go watch my Focal Trio video if you haven't yet, because I really thought this focus mode would just be a gimmick. It wouldn't be useful. It's just a gimmick. But you hook the foot switch up and it bypasses the big woofer and completely recalibrates the crossover to run the tweeter and the 5-inch woofer as a full range monitor. And that is so useful that for the first time in 10 years, I've packed up my NS10s. I don't have NS10s up here anymore because of how awesome this focus mode is. The sweet spot on them is absolutely enormous. It doesn't matter where I am in the room or if my client's sitting on the couch in the back part of the room. But the real thing is, every time I sit down in front of them, I feel something. This is getting a little bit weird and a little bit emotional, but I genuinely feel something. I sit down and I look at them. I don't know if it's the size of them. They're definitely the biggest ones. It certainly has something to do with the sound that's coming out of them, but I sit down and I get excited. I'm excited to work on music. I listen to what's coming out of them and I get inspired. I get like giddy like a little kid. They're the only speaker in this category that has given me and my clients and my wife, other engineers and other mixers that have come over, it's given us an emotional experience, which is crazy. The only other monitors I've ever experienced this on are the big ATCs, specifically in Blackbird, in Studio C at Blackbird, but those are 10 times the price of these. The translation of my mixes and my masters since I started using the Focals have been absolutely flawless. Single pass mixes approved left and right, translates awesome to the car, to the cell phone. It's crazy. Even though they are so flattering and so fun to listen to, so inspiring to listen to, they're still so analytical and so accurate that the tiniest of EQ moves I can hear, I've started compressing stuff less because of them. My mixes have legitimately leveled up since I started using the Focals. And there's something that happens to them when I finally like nail the mix. There's like a moment in the mixes or in the masters where the speakers like they come alive, like they start sounding even more special, if that makes any sense at all. I've been struggling to figure out how to put this into words. I truly cannot say enough good things about them. I am so incredibly pumped to have these in my room and continue moving forward with these, and I feel so fortunate to be able to work on these. There's links below for everything we discussed and all kinds of other stuff. Guys, thank you for coming along with me on this journey. Like, this has been a lot. It's been a lot to create these videos. It's been a lot to like reacclimate myself to monitor after monitor after monitor, and tear my studio apart over and over, try to get placement right. This has been a journey, and I hope you guys got something out of this, because it would have been a much easier journey if I wasn't filming it all. But I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got something out of this. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell next to the subscribe tab, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.